Ezekiel 37, it's such an amazingly graphic chapter. It's full of pictures. It's got two parables in here. So we start with the first half of the chapter is about some dry bones. And that's the picture we're given, a valley full of dry bones. And then the second half of the chapter, we're given a second picture. And the second picture is of two sticks getting joined together to become one. So we'll start at the beginning with the story of the dry bones. And in this parable, we have Ezekiel taken by the Spirit of the Lord, and he's taken to stand in a really unclean place for an Israelite. He was taken into a valley that was full of bones, and these weren't just any bones, these were dry bones. These were old bones, they'd been there such a long time. And Ezekiel is led I can almost imagine God leading, or the angel leading through these bones by the hand, taking Ezekiel and pulling him through this picture of devastation. And he's led to and fro among the valley of the bones. And then God asks him a question, and he says, "Can these bones live, Ezekiel?" And what a probing question to ask, isn't it? Can these bones live? And it's such a profound answer that Ezekiel gives, isn't it? This answer of, "O sovereign Lord, you alone know." Isn't that amazing? How Ezekiel has enough faith in his maker to be able to say, "You know what? I think you can. You can make these bones live, but do you want to?" That's almost what I can hear him saying when he says, "O sovereign Lord, you alone know." And then the Lord says to him, "Now start this prophecy." And it's interesting, like, why are you getting such a famous prophet to prophesy to bones? These bones can't hear. They have no ears. They can't see. They have no eyes. Yet he's getting asked to prophesy to these inanimate objects. There is no life in them. And so God asks Ezekiel to prophesy to the bones, and he says, and the sovereign Lord says to these bones, "I will make breath into you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord." So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise and a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them. But there was no breath in them. And then he said to me, "Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of Man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain, that they may live." And that is the story part. And after this section, we have the explanation for this image, this graphic image. But first, I want to take our attention to the end of verse 6. Well, where he says, after the prophesying about the flesh and skin and breath entering them, it then and the bones coming to life. It then says, "Then you will know that I am the Lord." And this is an amazing saying because it's said over and over and over again. It's said twice in this chapter, and I'd just like everyone to have a look at this table. I know it's not very pretty, but on this table you can see that these are the references to the "then you will know that I am the Lord" quotes. There are 3 references that are not in Ezekiel or Exodus. And on this table, this is by no means all of the Ezekiel quotes. There are actually a lot more. I've just put the dots in there because I didn't have time to write the full list of quotes from Ezekiel. But Ezekiel is full of this quote, "Then you will know that I am the Lord." And it's interesting to see that Exodus is the other place that God says over and over again, "Then you will know that I am the Lord." So, what does this say? What's the point of having these echoes through the Bible? And I think that this is a really strong link where Ezekiel is telling us a story. He's telling us a story about bones that have no hope, that are dry and worthless and brittle, getting given new life, a new hope, and getting taken out of where they are and placed in a new place. And what happens in Exodus to the children of Israel? The children of Israel in Exodus is that same story of children of God having no hope. This is a story of these bones. This story has been done before. If we compare these 2 verses from Ezekiel 37 verse 13, which is part of the explanation to the prophecy. "Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them." And look at this verse in Exodus. In Exodus 29 verse 46. "Then they will know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them up out of Egypt, so that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God." See, it even has this echo with "bring you up from them," who brought them out of Egypt. So let's look at the story of the dry bones again. With this in the back of our mind, that we have a story of Israel in the wilderness, but well, before the wilderness, in Egypt. And we also have a parallel. We have a story of Israel in captivity in Babylon. So we have slaves in Egypt and captives in Babylon. And so if we look back at the question that God asks of Ezekiel, he asks, "Son of man, can these bones live?" And if we look back at this parallel, God's almost asking, isn't he? Is Israel still in Egypt? Is my arm too short to be able to save my people again? Because as the children of Israel were captive in Babylon, they say, sorry, I'll just find the verse. In verse 11, then he said to me, "Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel." And they say, "Our bones are dried up. Our hope is gone. We are cut off." It's like the Israelites calling out when they were in Egypt because of the harsh bondage they were under. Our hope is gone. And then God says, "I will bring you back into the land." And that's exactly what he did from Egypt. And exactly what he's planning on doing with these bones. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead of myself there. So the bones have grown and they've come into being, as it were. But the emphasis here on breath, it says right in the end of verse 8, "But there was no breath in them." And then he said to me, "Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, son of man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain, that they may live." And what I find interesting through here is that these bones with no hope are given hope when they have the breath into them. But if we look at this chapter, I want us to have a look at these first 10 verses and look at the story again, but I'm just going to play tricks on your brain and show you specific words. These are all the same word in the Hebrew. And I just want us to notice that the rest of the body, the rest of the being, is not emphasized as much as the breath is emphasized in this chapter. The Spirit of the Lord is breathed into this army. Because you see, without the Lord in our lives, we have no hope. We are like those bones sitting on the valley floor with nothing to put our hope in, because our bones have been picked clean by the birds. They've been bleached by the sun, and they're just going to rot away into dust. But as soon as the Lord says, "I will put breath into you," we can now live. If we look in the valley and just take stock of what we're actually seeing, we see this valley with bones right back at the beginning. And we know a few things from the state of the bones because they've been picked clean by the birds, they've been bleached by the sun, and they're dry. But we also notice some things by what's not told to us. We can notice that these bones are in the open. No one has buried them. They've just been left there. They've been left there so long, yet no one has come to dig a hole and put them into a grave. And the question is why? Why has the whole house of Israel not got one person to bury them? And that's because the whole house of Israel has rotted away. And that's where their hope, they're saying, our hope is gone. What are they hoping in? They are hoping that the very least someone would come and bury their bones so then they're not left out in the open. But what does God say? God says, I can do better than that, Israel. I can breathe into you. You see, your hope doesn't have to be in a burial. Your hope can be in the freedom I give you with my spirit in your life, with my words washing over you day by day, with my purpose in your life. And then you will know that I am the Lord. You see, this is what he wants Israel to get out of this whole story. He wants them to see that our God is big, our God is powerful, so powerful that he can take what most people would say the only hope for them is a good burial, and he can take that and turn them into life, into a vast army, a unified army, one unit, so that he can bring them into his land again, so that all may know that he is the Lord. So that's our first parable, the parable of the dry bones. So the next parable we can see in Ezekiel 37 from verse 15 to 28. So 15 to the end. We have a parable of two sticks, Judah and Ephraim, and the Israelites associated with them. And I want us all to take note at this point and remember how Ezekiel was living. Ezekiel was mute. He was told to be quiet by the Lord until he was given a message to say. And you'll notice that in this section, we have Ezekiel taking two sticks and writing Judah and the Israelites associated with them, and Ephraim and the Israelites associated with them on a stick. But you'll see that Ezekiel is not speaking. And he takes these two sticks in front of the community of Israel in exile. And the Israelites obviously are interested. They're wondering what's going on. And he writes on the first stick, Judah. And then he writes on the second stick, Ephraim. And in front of all of their eyes, he takes these two sticks and somehow joins them together in front of them all. And then there's silence. Until someone asks, Won't you tell us what you mean by this? Isn't this interesting? You see, we have to put the effort in to figure out what God means by this. We have to sometimes ask that question. Lord, what do you mean by this situation? And so the Israelites, after a time, ask the question, so what do you mean by this? And then Ezekiel's mouth is opened. And he says, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I'm going to take the stick of Joseph, which is in Ephraim's hand, and the Israelite tribes associated with him, and join it into Judah's stick, making them a single stick. And they will become one in my hand. This is the first and overwhelming lesson of this parable. We have a stick that was once two, now one. We have these words that are brought to our attention time and time again, where the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take one stick and write on it Judah and the Israelites associated with him, and then take one stick of wood and write on it Ephraim's stick belonging to Joseph and the house of Israel associated with him, and join them one to one, so that they will become one in your hand. When your countrymen ask you, won't you tell us what you mean by this? And then you'll come down a little bit further, and then God says, join it together, Judah's stick, making them a single one in my hands. And we'll come back down further into verse 22, and God says, I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, and there will be one king over all of them. And he goes on to speaking about how never again will this land be divided. Never again will his people split apart and create disunity. Obviously, God has something on his mind about unity. When he can create a sentence that has so many ones in it, you get tongue twisted. And this is where we can look at this prophecy and say, yeah, Israel have come back to their land, but are they unified yet? Have they got one king? And we can see from this parable that we've got something more to look forward to. There is something more than just a nation of Israel in a land. But there is a unity that is to come. There is a king to come, one king that will rule over all of the people. In verse 24, they will have one shepherd. Isn't that exciting? As we know from hindsight, we know who that shepherd is because we are told that Jesus Christ is our shepherd. And we also know that he is wanting to create unity. He wants to take all the sheep and bring them together. So that's the first bit about Judah and Ephraim. God wants unity. He wants one people with one purpose, and him as the one king. I might skip over this actually and come back to it, but keep that in your minds. Forever is another theme that comes up through this. But this is something I noticed in verse 23 and verse 28. There's a section, and it's almost identical, yet very different. It's opposite, isn't it? And in verse 23, at the end of the chapter, at the end of the verse, I should say, it says, "Then they will be my people, and I will be their God." And in verse 28, it says, "I will be their God, and they will be my people." And you're probably wondering, Jeremy, why even bring this up? That's really exciting news. You've noticed that it said the sentence is flipped around. But I want us to look at the context of what's said around these verses. So in verse 23, they will no longer defile themselves with their idols, with their vile images, with any offences, for I will save them from their sinful backsliding, and I will cleanse them. They will be my people, and I will be their God. And then in verse 28, oh, did I get that wrong? Yes, I did. Verse 27. I'm sorry, it's wrong on the slide there. I'm going to start at verse 26 actually, for context. I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it will be an everlasting covenant. I will establish them and increase their numbers, and I will put my sanctuary among them forever. My dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Now, I'm sure some of you will have heard this story before. It's definitely not new, and I'm not claiming this as my own, but it really sums it up. And it's a really amazing story too. It's about farms. There are farms in Australia and farms in New Zealand, as we all know. And they're very different. If we have walked around New Zealand even a little bit, you'll notice that we have plenty of farms, and you'll notice them all nicely divided into paddocks. There'll be square sections of the perfect amount of grass for the type of cattle or sheep that are kept in the paddocks. They're partitioned off, and the grass grows nicely in that area, and the sheep or the cows are let into the field so that they can eat the grass that is in there. And the gates shut behind them, and they're kept nice and contained so that the New Zealand farmers can come along again and round them up quite quickly and move them on to the next paddock. But this is very different to Australia, because in Australia it's a lot more dry. The farms are far, far, far bigger. You need a way bigger land area to get the same amount of grass. And now it's near impossible. Well, not near impossible, but it's really expensive to build a fence that large around your herd. And it's really difficult to round up that many sheep or that many cows when you've got a land area that is that huge. when they're all wandering off eating grass in so many different directions. So in Australia, they set up where they want to collect their animals a water trough. You see, water's scarce, and the animals know that they need the water to live. So they start to congregate around the water. And so if we have these two pictures of these two farms in our minds, what do we notice? The first thing I notice is that the sheep in the New Zealand paddocks always have their heads stuck outside the fence. They're always trying to eat the grass on the other side. And then we have the sheep in Australia. They can wander as far or wide as they like, but the further they wander from the water, the less chance of life that can people still hear me? I'm getting a message saying that I've got a slow connection.
Yes, we are as well, Jeremy, but keep going. I think we're okay.
We can hear you fine.
Thank you very much.
Sound fine.
Okay, so we have these two pictures of one farm where the sheep are poking their head out the fences, and then the other where the sheep are congregating towards the water because that's where they know they will find their life. And so in these two sections, we have the first one where God says, I will put a fence around you so that you can no longer do your sinful backsliding. And so what's the emphasis there? They will be my people inside a fence, and I will be their God. But what do we notice about the second time that it's brought up? I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it will be an everlasting covenant. I will establish them and increase their numbers, and I will put my sanctuary among them forever. You see what he's doing? He's putting his sanctuary in the middle, and he's giving us the opportunity to say, yes, you can be my God. He's giving us the opportunity to say, I'm going to come to you as the spring of water in the center of my life. Because no longer do I need those fences, because the sinful backsliding doesn't need to happen. When I know that I need the water, so I'll stay near it, so that the shepherd can guide my steps. And I thought that was pretty amazing. And so we have this last message that's of these two parables, really. It's of both of them. It's of the bones, and it's also of the children of Israel getting joined, unified into one. And I'd love everyone to notice the emphasis on forever. The emphasis here, we can see in verse 22, there'll be one king over them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms. They will no longer defile themselves. And we can jump down to verse 25. Their children, their children's children, their children and their children's children will live there forever. And David, my servants, will be their prince forever. And I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it will be an everlasting covenant. And we jump down, I'll put my sanctuary among them forever. Then the nations will know that I, the Lord, make Israel holy. And when my sanctuary is among them, forever. This is what we have to look forward to. God's sanctuary among his people forever. And I love this look of the two branches that are before us, because God has said, I can join Judah and Ephraim, two houses of Israel that were at loggerheads for the whole separation of Israel. They were fighting each other for that long. And he can take those two disjointed brothers, he can join them together. He can graft these two sticks together into one stick of wood. And he can also take us and graft us into his family, into his children. You see, this promise of forever is also to us. It takes looking into the New Testament to see that, but we can take heart from this chapter. We can say that our hope is not lost. We may feel like dry bones, but is our God's arm too short that he cannot save? By no means. He has taken his children of Israel out of Egypt. It's been seen, it's been done. We've seen it in more recent times with Israel being established as a nation. But we will see in the future a unified nation with one king, bringing them all together so that we can all be his family, to give him honor and glory as the bride of Christ. It reminds me a lot of the New Testament, where we're told about Christ as our head and that we are his body, and that we cannot be divided in this body. But we all have different functions. We're all asked to be slightly different, to achieve different things, but to accomplish one purpose. You see, we're not asked to be all a hand or all a foot, but what we are asked as hands and feet, as mouths, as ears, as eyes, to achieve one purpose. And that purpose is to be transformed into the likeness of our Lord Jesus Christ. Because when we are like that, unity is inevitable. When we are like that, God will be happy to let us have forever with him. So let's look to his kingdom and answer the question, is our God's hand too short? No way. Our God can breathe life into our dry bones. Thank you all. Are there any questions or comments?